He's the author of the short fiction collection 20th Century Ghosts and collaborates with artist Gabriel Rodriguez on the dark fantasy comic Lock and Key. He's written the critically acclaimed novels Heart-Shaped Box, Horns, and now Nosferatu.
Yeah.
I should have asked you.
No, that was good.
Okay,
Yep.
good.
Yep, you got it. NOS 482, Nosferatu. Right.
All right. But I think, anyways, okay, you ruined my joke. Okay.
Oh, God, I'm so sorry.
I ruined the joke. I'm sorry. And now Nosferatu. And I think we all know he's most proud of his 26,000th tweet milestone. Now 26,102. Please welcome Joe Hill.
I don't. Oh wait, do I? Oh yeah, I don't. So this is cool. I feel like I should read like this. That would be kind of different. This is kind of like the Shatner microphone. Spock! Damn it, Spock, where are you? Well, I want to thank the Toledo Library for... Oh, wait. I've been everywhere I've been going, hey, hello, Toledo! I've been thinking that would be really cool, but so far it's never come off as funny as I hoped it would. I do want to thank the library for having me and for all you guys for coming out. This is really cool. I had some really exciting news this afternoon. My ego's been humming ever since. I found out from my publisher about 45 minutes ago that Nosferatu is going to be on the New York Times list at number 5 in a couple weeks. So, thanks. So that's really cool. So my general procedure is to read a couple pages from the book and then take questions from the crowd until I start to see a glazed look coming over people's faces, and then I'll go out and sign. Nosferatu is a big book. It's an everything but the kitchen sink book. It's as long as my first 2 novels put together. And it covers both 25 years and a lot of road. So there are scenes set in Kentucky and Massachusetts and New Hampshire, Colorado and Iowa, as a matter of fact. And when I was in Kentucky the other day, I actually read a nice little scene set in Kentucky. There is a character named Maggie Lay in this book who not only lives in Iowa, but is an Iowa librarian. She is a punk rock librarian, and she figures prominently into the story. And I would really like to read one of those scenes to you guys because it seems like the right place for it and everything. But I'm not going to. Because it's just like they're just like one spoiler bomb after another, and I feel like I would rather let you read the book and discover Maggie for yourself. So even though we're in Iowa, even though the scenes in Iowa are all set in a library, in a public library, not so different from this one, we're gonna avoid all that. Instead, what I think I'm going to do is I'll read you the beginning of the book, and then we'll talk about the story a little bit afterwards. I think the opening scene works pretty well. So here we go. Prologue. Season's greetings. December 2008. FCI Englewood, Colorado. Nurse Thornton dropped into the long-term care ward a little before 8 with a hot bag of blood for Charlie Manx. She was coasting on autopilot, her thoughts not on her work. She had finally made up her mind to buy her son, Josiah, the Nintendo DS he wanted, and was calculating whether she could get to Toys R Us after her shift before they closed. She had been resisting the impulse for a few weeks on philosophical grounds. She didn't really care if all his friends had one. She just didn't like the idea of those handheld video game systems that the kids carried with them everywhere. Ellen Thornton resented the way little boys disappeared into the glowing screen, ditching the real world for some province of the imagination where fun replaced thought, and inventing creative new kills was an art form. She had fantasized having a child who would love books and play Scrabble and want to go on snowshoeing expeditions with her. What a laugh. Ellen had held out as long as she could, and then, yesterday afternoon, she had come across Josiah sitting on his bed pretending an old wallet was a Nintendo DS. He had cut out a picture of Donkey Kong and slipped it into the clear plastic sleeve for displaying photographs. He pressed imaginary buttons and made explosion sounds, and her heart had hurt a little, watching him make believe he already had something he was certain he would get on the big day. Ellen could have her theories about what was healthy for boys and what wasn't. That didn't mean Santa had to share them. Because she was preoccupied, she didn't notice what was different about Charlie Manx until she was easing around his cot to reach the IV rack. He happened to sigh heavily just then, as if bored, and she looked down and saw him staring up at her, and she was so startled to see him with his eyes open that she bobbled the sack of blood and almost dumped it on her feet. He was hideous old, not to mention hideous. His great bald skull was a globe mapping an alien moon, continents marked by liver spots and bruise-colored sarcomas. Of all the men in the long-term care ward, a.k.a. the vegetable patch, there was something particularly awful about Charlie Manx with his eyes open at this time of year. Manx, like children. He'd made dozens of them disappear back in the 90s. He had a house below the Flatirons where he did what he liked with them and killed them and hung Christmas ornaments in their memory. The papers called the place the Sleigh House. Ho, ho, ho. For the most part, Ellen could shut off the mother side of her brain while she was at work, could keep her mind away from thoughts of what Charlie Manx had probably done with the little girls and boys who had crossed his path. Little girls and boys no older than her Josiah. Ellen didn't muse on what any of her charges had done if she could help it. The patient on the other side of the room had tied up his girlfriend and her 2 children, set fire to their house and left them to burn. He was arrested in a bar down the street, drinking Bushmills and watching the White Sox play the Rangers. Ellen didn't see how dwelling on it was ever going to do her any favors, and so she had taught herself to think of her patients as extensions of the machines and drip bags they were hooked up to, meat peripherals. In all the time she had been working at FCI Englewood in the Supermax prison infirmary, she had never seen Charlie Manx with his eyes open. She'd been on staff for 3 years, and he had been comatose all that time. He was the frailest of her patients, a fragile coat of skin with bones inside. His heart monitor blipped like a metronome set to the slowest possible speed. The doc said he had as much brain activity as a can of creamed corn. No one had ever determined his age, but he looked older than Keith Richards. He even looked a little like Keith Richards, a bald Keith with a mouth full of sharp little brown teeth. There were 3 other coma patients in the ward, what the staff called gorks. When you were around them long enough, you learned that all the gorks had their quirks. Don Henry, the man who burned his girl and her kids to death, went for walks sometimes. He didn't get up, of course, but his feet pedaled weakly under the sheets. There was a guy named Leonard Potts who'd been in a coma for 5 years and was never going to wake up. Another prisoner had jammed a screwdriver through his brain. But sometimes he cleared his throat and would shout, "I know," as if he were a small child who wanted to answer the teacher's question. Maybe opening his eyes was Manx's quirk, and she just never caught him doing it before. "Hello, Mr. Manx," Ellen said automatically. "How are you feeling today?" She smiled a meaningless smile and hesitated, still holding the sack of body-temperature blood. She didn't expect a reply, but thought it would be considerate to give him a moment to collect his non-existent thoughts. When he didn't say anything, she reached forward with one hand to slide his eyelids closed. He caught her wrist. She screamed, couldn't help it, and dropped the bag of blood. It hit the floor and exploded in a crimson gush, the hot spray drenching her feet. "Ah!" she cried. "Ah! Oh, God!" It smelled like fresh poured iron. "Your boy, Josiah," Charlie Manx said to her, his voice grating and harsh. "There's a place for him in Christmas land with the other children. I could give him a new life. I could give him a nice new smile. I could give him nice new teeth. Hearing him say her son's name was worse than having Manx's hand on her wrist or blood on her feet. Hearing this man speak of her son made her dizzy, genuinely dizzy, as if she were in a glass elevator rushing quickly into the sky, the world dropping away beneath her. Let go, she whispered. There's a place for Josiah John Thornton in Christmasland, and there's a place for you in the House of Sleep, Charlie Manx said. The gas mask man would know just what to do with you, give you the gingerbread smoke and teach you to love him. Can't bring you with us to Christmasland, or I could, but the gas mask man is better. The gas mask man is a mercy. Help, Ellen screamed, except it didn't come out as a scream. It came out as a whisper. Help me. She couldn't find her voice. I've seen Josiah in the graveyard of what might be. Josiah should come for a ride in the Wraith. He'd be happy forever in Christmasland. The world can't ruin him there, because it isn't in the world. It's in my head. They're all safe in my head. I've been dreaming about it, you know. Christmasland. I've been dreaming about it, but I walk and walk, and I can't get to the end of the tunnel. I hear the children singing, but I can't get to them. I hear them shouting for me, but the tunnel doesn't end. I need the Wraith. Need my ride. His tongue slipped out of his mouth, brown and glistening and obscene, and wet his dry lips, and he let go. Help, she whispered. Help, help, help. She had to say it another time or two before she could say it loud enough for anyone to hear her. Then she was batting through the doors into the hall, running in her soft, flat shoes, screaming for all she was worth, leaving bright red footprints behind her. 10 minutes later, a pair of officers in riot gear had strapped Manx down to his cot, just in case he opened his eyes and tried to get up. But the doctor, who eventually arrived to examine him, said to unlash him. This guy has been in bed since 2001. He has to be turned 4 times a day to keep from getting sores. Even if he wasn't a gork, he's too weak to go anywhere. After 7 years of muscle atrophy, I doubt he could sit up on his own. Ellen was listening from over next to the doors. If Manx opened his eyes again, she planned to be the first one out of the room. But when the doctor said that, she walked across the floor on stiff legs and pulled her sleeve back from her right wrist to show the bruises where Manx had grabbed her. Does that look like something done by a guy too weak to sit up? I thought he was going to yank my arm out of the socket. Her feet stung almost as badly as her bruised wrist. She had stripped off her blood-soaked pantyhose and gone at her feet with scalding water and antibiotic soap until they were raw. She was in her gym sneakers now. The other shoes were in the garbage. Even if they could be saved, she didn't think she'd ever be able to put them on again. The doctor, a young Indian named Patel, gave her an abashed, apologetic look and bent to shine a flashlight in Manx's eyes. His pupils did not dilate. Patel moved the flashlight back and forth, but Manx's eyes remained fixed on a point just beyond his left ear. The doctor clapped his hands an inch from Manx's nose. Manx did not blink. Patel gently closed Manx's eyes and examined the reading from the EKG they were running. There's nothing here that's any different from any of the last dozen EKG readings, Patel said. Patient scores a 9 on the Glasgow scale. Shows slow alpha wave activity consistent with alpha coma. I think he was just talking in his sleep, nurse. It even happens to gorks like this guy. His eyes were open, she said. He looked right at me. He knew my name. He knew my son's name. Patel said, ever had a conversation around him with one of the other nurses? No telling what the guy might have unconsciously picked up. You tell another nurse, oh, hey, my son just won the spelling bee. Manx hears it and regurgitates it mid-dream. She nodded, but a part of her was thinking he knew Josiah's middle name, something she was sure she had never mentioned to anyone here in the hospital. There's a place for Josiah John Thornton in Christmasland, Charlie Manx had said to her, and there's a place for you in the House of Sleep. I never got his blood in, she said. He's been anemic for a couple weeks. Picked up a urinary tract infection from his catheter. I'll go get a fresh pack. Never mind that. I'll get the old vampire his blood. Look, you've had a nasty little scare. Put it behind you. Go home. You only have, what, an hour left on your shift? Take it. Take tomorrow, too. Got some last-minute shopping to finish? Go do it. Stop thinking about this and relax. It's Christmas, Nurse Thornton, the doctor said, and winked at her. Don't you know it's the most wonderful time of the year? So the story is about this man, Charles Manx. And Charlie has lived for over a century. And he has a special car, a Rolls-Royce Wraith, that runs on human souls instead of gasoline. And Charlie has used this car to keep himself young and fit for over a century. He takes his passengers, usually children, and drains that essential life force out of them. And when he's done with them, there's really nothing left to them except hate and teeth. And he drops these kids, abandons them in this nightmarish playground called Christmas Land, which doesn't exactly exist in our own world. And Charlie is opposed across the course of the novel by a woman with a special ride of her own, Victoria McQueen. Vic is a road-battered and loving, if reluctant, young mother. And she has a Triumph Bonneville motorcycle. I was not paid for product placement. She has a Triumph Bonneville motorcycle that can also throw a little kink into reality. Charlie uses his special ride to destroy lives, and Vic uses hers to save them. And it's not a surprise that they find each other in opposition. And their duel takes place across all these years and all these thousands of miles of road. So that's basically the one-paragraph description of the book. The title, which is something of a puzzle, is NOS 4A2, and which has been noted, if you sound it out, spells Nosferatu, which is the German word for vampire. And it's the vanity license plate on Charlie's ride. Charlie may be a bad fellow, but he's not entirely without a sense of humor. So that's my summary of the book. And now we move into the exciting Q&A phase of the event. I am happy to answer any questions you may have for me, either about this book or my earlier novels or my short stories or the comic book, about creativity, about process, about relationships, political prognostication, where the Red Sox are likely to finish in the AL East. It's really all up to you. The one thing that's awkward is when people are shy and don't want to ask questions, when they're reluctant to be the first one to step up to the microphone, which is not exactly like stepping out on the ledge 5 stories above a building, but it is tough for some people to do it. And my strategy to that has been, if you guys are too shy to ask questions, then I'll ask them. And I just find someone who looks eager in the audience, and we'll find out if you know the capital of Peru. If you're not confident about your world geography or your knowledge of the Napoleonic Wars, one way to protect yourself is to ask a question. And I'm just throwing it out there. I see that they do have a microphone set up, so I'm guessing they want you to use it. So go for it. Are we going to use this microphone? We are going to use the microphone?
Okay.
Yeah. Come right up. Step right up.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Was really looking forward to it when I seen it on Facebook. I just got the book, and I'm only like on, I think, 72 or whatever. But not to take away from your book, but love Lock and Key.
Oh, thank you.
Any idea when Volume 6 is coming out?
Right. So I moonlight as a writer of comic books, and I have had an ongoing comic book for about 5 years now called Lock and Key. Lock and Key is about a New England mansion that's a couple centuries old and is filled with impossible and unlikely keys. And each key can subvert reality in a different way. So, for example, there's one key that opens something called the ghost door. And if you walk through it, your body will fall dead, but your spirit will travel on free. And you can float around and look at stuff as a ghost and then fly back through the door and re-enter your body. And there's a whole collection of other keys, and each key does something different. And unusual. And of course, there's one key that no one should use and a thing called Dodge that wants to get a hold of it. So I've been working on this comic for about 5 years, and the genesis of it, the reason I've had this ongoing comic is basically Neil Gaiman. When I was a teenager, the writers I cared most about was Neil Gaiman and the work he was doing on Sandman, and Alan Moore and the work he did on Swamp Thing. And even later, as a grown-up, I would look at something like Why Last Man by Brian Vaughan, and I would say to myself, I really want to ride this bull. I really want to see what this is like, to not just tell a closed narrative with two covers, but to do something ongoing and episodic. I'm a big fan of episodic fiction. So I had a chance to do this comic, Lock and Key, and I got started on it. I do believe that even episodic fiction requires closure, though, that there must be some ending, that at some point you have to stop raising questions and start answering them. And you have to stop creating problems for your characters and give them a chance to resolve them. And so Lock and Key is winding down. At this particular moment in time, there are 3 single issues left to come out before the series is done. And the single issues are collected into hardcovers. There have been 5 hardcovers. The last hardcover is called Lock and Key Alpha and Omega. And that will be, that should be out in October.
Thank you.
That was the long-winded answer to your very simple question.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Later we get to a speed round, though.
So I'm wondering, what is your writing regiment? I'm just going to keep it simple like that.
Right.
Yeah, writing regiment, daily, whatever, how many hours?
I'm very habit-driven. I live and die by my to-do list, and the first thing on my to-do list each day is the morning drill, which is got a sub-list of 5 items. And one of the things on that sub-list is write 1,000 words. And nothing in my day really happens until those 5 items are checked off. It all just has to wait. And I do more than just 1,000 words a day, but that first 1,000 words feels key to me. The rest of what's on the morning drill is not very interesting, but I can see in your face you want to know. So I read 1 poem. I read 1 article in the New York Times. I take my Paxil, and I walk the dog. So anyway, that's the basic habit, and it seems to have worked pretty well. Someone said, I saw a thing on Tumblr today where someone said there are 2 states of being, writing and not writing. If you write every day, you're a writer. If you only think about writing every day, you're existing in a state of not writing, and you are not a writer. And that there's the romance of not writing is kind of like the romance of making a sandwich and eating it, or only thinking about making a sandwich. You will not be fed while you're just thinking about it. If that's romantic to you, then that's great. So that's my routine. I really do work every day. I mean, I even write on Christmas. Overrated holiday. Go ahead.
This seems like a very unique story, and I'm kind of wondering, where did you get this idea?
Yeah, what was the genesis? I probably by the end of the tour, I will have made up some bullshit that sounds really good. But for now, I'm stuck with the true story, which is a couple summers ago, a friend of mine was rebuilding his Triumph Bonneville 1978, and he said, "You want to come help me rebuild it?" By which he meant, "Do you want to hold the wrenches while I rebuild it?" And so I did that, and it was like a couple fun nights. It was a fun week hanging out with him. And by the end of it, I was thinking, I should write a story about a motorcycle, something nice and small. And I wound up with Nosferatu. So there you go. Go ahead.
Hey, I was curious, in Horns, you basically give away the bad guy before page 60. Mm-hmm. I was curious if you could talk a little
Why?
bit about the decision to do that, and specifically, was that in every draft? And was it something that just happened while you were writing, or was it something you decided to do as a challenge to see if you could maintain interest for another couple hundred pages?
Right. So my second novel, Horns, is about this sweet, decent young guy, very much in love, and his girlfriend is murdered. And in the small town where he lives, pretty much everyone believes he's the one who killed her. So his whole town has kind of demonized him. And he gets drunk one night and goes out and curses God. And the next morning, when he wakes up, he discovers he's growing a pair of horns from his temples. And with these horns comes all the powers of the devil. And he decides to use these powers to try to find the person who killed his girlfriend. So that's the plot of the story. The mystery takes 60 pages to resolve. But the book is 325 pages long. And I think that's because I'm not really interested in whodunits. And I think a lot of readers are also not interested in whodunits. I think what's more interesting is why done it, and who are they, and what now. And that was kind of what I wanted to explore over the course of Horns, is what would it do to this basically decent and kind man to discover that this particular person had slaughtered his beloved. And specifically, I was really interested to find out if you can, it's one of these, fiction asks big questions that are hard, nonfiction answers questions that do have answers, and fiction asks questions that don't really. Like, what happens to us after we die? I have no idea how many hundreds of thousands of millions of stories there have been trying to explain what happens after we die. We don't know, so we write stories about it. And then there is the question asked in Job, which is, why do good people suffer? If there is a loving God, why would He let this happen? And also, can a good man be turned wicked by misadventure? Can things be so bad that finally a good man decides, I've had it with being good? And that's really what I wanted to do, is I wanted to explore Ig and see if he could be tested in a way that would make him compromise his own soul. So that was kind of what I was interested in. I wasn't really interested in who did it. On a more practical level, I didn't think I could fool anyone, so I didn't see any reason to try. I do have like, in the novel I'm working on now, I'm working on a new novel called The Fireman. And in the middle of The Fireman, there is one of these like J.K. Rowling puzzles that I'm really happy with, where I feel like a whole set of expectations are like doubly confounded, and in a way that makes emotional sense. If you can pull something like that off, it's great, but I would never strain for it.
Okay, thanks.
Go ahead.
Hi. Recently on Twitter, I saw that you referred to Horns as like your unplugged or acoustic book, and it's kind of like a harrowing and emotional book. And I was just wondering if you could expand on what you meant by it's your unplugged book.
I think that I have a rap as a horror novelist. That's basically, and I'm not embarrassed by that. That doesn't, that's not. When I was a kid, a lot of kids my age had like posters on their walls of like athletes and like rock stars and stuff. And all my posters were torn out of like Fangoria magazine. And they were, it was always like someone's eye coming out of their head with like the hatchet in it. And, and Fangoria magazine, for those of you who don't know, was a magazine that celebrated the work of the gross out special effects artists of the 80s and 90s. It's still going, So I'm in Fangoria magazine. You would sometimes come across a director who would say, "I don't really think of myself as a horror director," and like he just directed like Sorority Massacre 3, and I'd be like, "Dude, I hate to break it to you, but you're not Fellini." And so I'm very comfortable, wearing my horror guy cloak, my blood-spattered horror guy apron. Horns is not really a horror novel, and I think that's why it was very, its heart-shaped box I think is pretty scary. I think that Heart-Shaped Box, I went out to scare people as hard as I could, and I think it does. Nosferatu is a book where I really, I want it to be a roller coaster ride in the dark. I want it to be fast and scary, especially because it's so long. It's 700 pages. I don't want anyone to look, get 20 pages in and be looking ahead and be going, oh, this looks like a lot of work. The longer it is, the more fun it has to be. The more you want it to be a jet of adrenaline. But Horns is not really that kind of book. Horns is much more introspective and is really a tragic love story. It's really a story of first love and how wonderful and tormenting that can be, and all the tragic ways that first love can go awry. And it's about broken trust, and it tries to imagine what would it be like if you knew the worst things everyone thought about you. Could you still love them, or would that just completely twist you out of shape? And none of those things are really horror novel ideas. And it's also tough to sell something as a horror novel when it's built around a demon and the demon is the hero. In The Exorcist, the demon is real bad, but in this, he's kind of trundling around in a blue skirt and just trying to make his way, and he's a sweetheart, So that's why I call it sort of an unplugged novel, because I'm very, very, very proud of Horns. I think it's I'm very glad I wrote it, but I think it's different than Nosferatu and Heart-Shaped Box.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I've noticed throughout Nosferatu you make various references to your father's works, the Pennywise Circus. You mentioned Shawshank Penitentiary. There's even an obscure Dark Tower reference about Midworld. Are you a big fan of your father's work, and also, is he a big fan of yours?
My father is an up-and-coming novelist. He's done a few books of his own in the scary line, and there's some reason to believe if he keeps at it, he'll have a future in the business. I try not to get too frustrated with him riding on my coattails, but no. When I started writing, when I was in college, I came to a sudden realization that writing fiction as Joseph King might not be such a good idea. Because I was afraid that I might write something not very good, and a publisher would decide to take a chance on it anyway because they saw a chance to make a quick buck in the last name. And I didn't think that was a very good plan, because readers are pretty smart, and they might read your first book because you got a famous daddy, but if the book sucks, they'll never read the next one. And I wanted to have a long career. So I dropped the name King and started writing under my middle name, Joe Hill. And I was able to keep the secret for about 10 years. And in that time, I was able to make my mistakes in private, which is where they belong. And I wrote several novels I was never able to sell, one of which I spent 3 years on. And I was convinced, it was a breakthrough piece of work. And then it was turned down everywhere in America and everywhere in England. And for an extra kick in the pants, they turned it down in Canada. And it was frustrating at the time. But now I look back with gratitude, because I feel that was the right outcome. The book didn't sell for a simple reason. It wasn't good enough. I had 10 years to build up my craft and find my subject and voice, and most importantly, to develop some confidence, because I was very insecure. I really needed to know when I sold a story that I was selling it for the right reasons, because someone was excited about it, not because they knew something about my family. And in the end, I was able to get some of what I wanted. I did sell a number of short stories without anyone knowing. I sold my first book of stories to a small press in England. It was turned down in America and by the big presses in England, but a small press took a chance on it. And that came out, and then eventually I was able to sell Heart-Shaped Box to an American publisher. before that went to press, my cover came apart, it sort of melted like tissue paper in the rain. But I did have this period of time when I was able to sell some things and to build up my confidence. In my first 3 books, though, I studiously avoided, even though it was scary fiction, I studiously avoided tramping in my dad's territory. I probably, if not for the pen name, I probably never would have written horror anyway, because I would have been afraid. I would have thought, well, people would just think I'm, cashing in on his deal. But when I was writing as Joe Hill and no one knew anything about me, I could write whatever I wanted. And it turned out I kind of liked writing scary stuff and supernatural stuff. Even after it came out, I was still very shy about anything that might too overtly connect me to my dad. But when I was working on Nosferatu, I don't know, I just, maybe it's because I'm 40 or something. My dad's my best friend. And, I'm a huge fan of his work. I'm a huge Stephen King fan. And I thought maybe instead of ducking it, I'll take it on. Maybe instead of swerving around it, I'll have some fun with it. And so there are a lot of Stephen King gags in Nosferatu. There's a lot of other gags too. There's a lot of this pop culture riffing on Joss Whedon and Firefly. There's a whole chapter that's one big homage to David Mitchell, who's one of my favorite writers of my generation. There's a lot of game playing in there, but there's a lot of Stephen King stuff. I wanted Nosferatu to be my senior thesis on horror fiction, and I didn't think I could do that without confronting my dad's body of work, and I had some fun doing it. So, and when I read all his stuff, and I love his stuff, and when I had the good news today about the book doing well, I actually heard it first from him. So, anyway.
Thank you.
Sure.
So you kind of alluded it to already, but could you talk about your next novel and when it's going to come out and where you're at in the process?
The next book is called The Fireman. It's 2/3 done. 2014, 2015. That's all I could say. I don't think it's a good idea to start talking plot or characters when something's unfinished. What happens is you spend all that energy like, oh, and this happens and this is really cool, and then you don't need to write it anymore. So it's that pressure to get that story out there that drives you to finish it. So I don't want to do anything to relieve the pressure. Go ahead.
When you start a book like Nosferatu or any of your books, like when you sit down, do you know where the story is going, where it's going to end, and you just kind of fill in the blanks, or do you just kind of let it take you for a little bit of a ride yourself?
Yeah, I let it take me for a ride, like a passenger in the back of Charlie's car. See where it's going to go.
Yeah.
I think I've said many times that I think outlines are the tools of the devil, and I avoid them. When I write a story, I usually start with concept. I try to find a bright, shiny concept, a clever idea that seems like something worth poking at. And I always feel those high concept ideas are the glue that stick the reader to the story to begin with. But I also think they're kind of like the flavor in juicy fruit. It's like you start chewing a juicy fruit, and for 15 seconds it's the best gum on the planet. And then after that, it's like chewing paste. There's nothing there. And I think the thing that keeps people reading a story, maybe what starts them is the interesting concept, but what keeps them reading is character. And so when I work on a first draft, I'm really just trying to figure out who these people are. I'm trying to find their voice and learn about their obsessions and fixations and their regrets. And I try to uncover all that and let them drive the story. Because when you know who a character is, then you can drop them in any box you want and just let them punch their way out. And you find out a lot about them, and they will constantly take actions that surprise you and you didn't expect. And so that's basically my method. And then when the first draft is done, I write that first draft for me to figure out kind of what I want the story to feel like and look like, sort of a rough narrative arc, although a lot of times there are side trips that will totally disappear later. Things I explored hundreds of pages sometimes that I explored about some subject where I'm like, nah, not important. But all the drafts after the first draft are about the reader. the first draft is where I get what I need. All the other drafts is about trying to shape something that will be what the reader needs, and just being merciless about, telling the difference between what I like and what the reader will like. It does not always overlap.
Thank you.
Sure.
First off, how you doing? What's up?
I'm doing well. Great. This is awesome. You guys are great to come. I think it's great anyone will come to a reading. Isn't that nuts?
Yeah, so I'm pretty nervous actually talking.
Don't be
to you.
nervous.
It's
cool.
crazy.
I haven't been anyone for 3 years. That's why I got on the Paxil.
So it was kind of touched on already. I was kind of wondering about the next book that you're working on, but as you've done with some short stories, some collaborations with like your father and everything, I was wondering if you plan on ever doing that with a full novel, collaborating with anybody on a...
With anyone? Yeah.
Yeah.
I've collaborated on 2 short stories with my dad, and I've collaborated on 2 screenplays with my brother Owen. My brother Owen King just had his first novel out. It's called Double Feature. It was so funny I snotted on myself. I think it's as funny as the world according to Garp. Owen has also wrestled with the Stephen King thing and how to handle it, and his solution was to write under his own name, but to write something 180 degrees different from what my dad is known for. And so he wrote a comic novel that's kind of a John Irving type thing, that's neither here. But there was a prior life where before I was a short story writer and before Owen was a novelist, me and him worked in screenplays together. And I find, when I was a little kid, there was this tomato-colored IBM typewriter in my mom's office. And someone would sometimes roll a sheet of paper in and write a couple sentences and just leave it. And other people from the family would drift in and write some more sentences. And you would wind up with this. And you would take the main character in this ongoing story and try to put them in some horrible, diabolical situation and then leave it for someone else to solve. And we called it the writing game. And we would sort of have these ongoing writing games that would sometimes go for a week or two. And when I write a story with my dad or with my brother, I feel like I'm playing the writing game again, and that's all. I don't know. It might be difficult to collaborate with someone who doesn't have that shared experience. It might be fun, but it might be difficult. I'm a controlling bastard. I like to have things. I really like to have things my way. When I have an ear for a certain way I want dialogue, and another writer might have a different kind of ear, tuned to different grace notes and stuff, and then we'd fight, and he'd get unhappy because I'd have to have it my way. So. Go ahead.
Hi, Joe.
Hi.
I read Horns when it first came out. I thought it was the greatest novel of the year.
Oh,
I really did.
Very kind. Thank you.
But this is on a completely different note. Gunpowder. Are you planning on releasing that in the United States?
I wrote a science fiction novella called Gunpowder. Gunpowder is the story of a parent in a frozen wasteland, trapped with a family of savage boys. So it's actually based quite closely on my life. It's set in a science fictional world, and it is kind of a cross between Lord of the Flies and 2001. And it's 90 pages long, and it tells a complete story, but it's not over because it kind of tells that complete story, but then it's kind of like, wait, but now what? Because it's really, that one complete story really feels more like a beginning than an ending. And I have always said there are 3 more Gunpowder novellas to come, and that all together they will make one book. And I've talked about, I spent the last year or two, I've been talking about it longer, I guess, because I think Gunpowder goes back to like 2006. So it's probably been 6 years now. I have been talking about the second one, Slave Girls of Gunpowder, for years. I have some material on it, but it's a project I love, and I can't wait to get back to it. But I have to wait to get back to it. It just keeps winding up on the back burner because I've got the Fireman next that I have to finish, and I've got to finish Lock and Key, and so it's got to wait its turn. And it's been very unfair to Gunpowder, but eventually there will be more, yes.
Thank you.
Sure.
I actually had two questions, but they're already taken, about the Unplugged and about the collaboration.
Okay.
So now I have a curiosity, if anything. Years ago, when I was very young, I went to Colorado and visited a horrible, horrible theme park called the North Pole.
Yeah.
And that, to me, was Christmas land, and I was just wondering if there was any, if you'd ever been there, and...
There's a place in New Hampshire called Santa's Village, which is,
This is-
you know, but there are several. I am aware of about a dozen of these Christmas places. You know, these celebrations of Christmas, and most of them were built in the 50s and they're still around now, but they look like they haven't been, you know, like their sculptures haven't been washed since like 1957. So there are these, you know, grinning Santas, you know, and they just kind of look like, you know, recently released psychopaths, you know, and their beard is all filthy and everything like that, and they just have plaster is crumbling away. And if I was like a 7-year-old kid and I saw that, I'd be like, "Take me away, Daddy, no!" I just start crying. You know, Lon Chaney once said there's nothing funny about a clown at midnight. And I think that good horror works on unsettling juxtapositions between what seems safe, harmless, and lovable and what's terrifying. And I got thinking about, as I was working on the book very early going, I started thinking, you know, if it's the middle of the summer and you're out walking in the woods and you go by an old house where the windows are kicked in and it's all dark inside, and you hear jingle bells coming from inside, something not right about that. Just the thought of it is sort of, walk faster. But as a horror writer, your job is not to walk faster, your job is to linger. So, there you go. That's hence Christmas Land.
Hi.
Hi.
So you're looking at Lock and Key and you're thinking, okay, I really want to write something episodic. It's really going to be
Right.
stretched out over all this time. When you start on that, what do you do when you first look at it and you're thinking, oh my God, I'm going to run out of ideas by page 8, and then where am I going to go since I've already decided it's got to be 6 volumes or 8 volumes or however long it's going to go?
Well, the first thing is, okay, so when IDW Publishing contacted me before Heart-Shaped Box came out, they had read some of my short stories and they had asked about possibly adapting them to comic books. That's something they had been doing with some other sort of cultish fantasy, science fiction, and horror writers like Cory Doctorow. And I said, no, wait. I have an idea for an original comic series for you. And I'll tell the whole, if you let me script it, I'll tell the whole thing in 6 issues. And they bought that. So here we're creeping up on like 40 issues in, and I'm just winding it down. The truth is, before I was a novelist, I was a comic book writer. Well before the pen name disintegrated on me, well before Heart-Shaped Box, my big professional breakthrough was a talent scout at Marvel, read one of my short stories in a best-of collection, and contacted me and said, do you have any interest in writing about guys in tights punching each other? And I was like, hell yeah, you know? And so before I ever had a novel out, I had a story in Spider-Man Unlimited. And it is absolutely the most horrible thing I've ever written. It's so bad. It was kind of saved by some great looking art, but it was not. The strange thing is even though it was a colossal failure in my mind, it also kind of sunk its hooks in me. Like it was an experience I really wanted to have again, and it really put me in touch with how much I had loved comics, not just as a kid, but through my whole life. How inspired I had been by things like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and and The Dark Knight Returns, and just this huge, I had 11 long boxes of comics, and I just thought, why have I been trying so hard to write novels when clearly I should be writing comics? So I sort of, in terms of Lock and Key was when I was looking for more work, Lock and Key was one of the pitches I offered Marvel Comics. I had also offered them, I remember a Baby Hulk story, because I had a 2-year-old at that time, and the tantrums were fearsome. And I was not prepared for these explosions of rage. And I thought, what if instead of throwing a plastic truck at me, he could throw a real truck? And so I was like, Baby Hulk. And, I was really excited for that, and they didn't want to do that. And I showed them Lock and Key, and they took a pass on that. A lot of other comic book companies took a pass on it. But I kept thinking about it. I kept thinking about that story. I would be out driving to get diapers at 1 in the morning, and I would think up a new key, and I had this stir of ideas. And so when I did get asked by IDW if I wanted to work with them in some capacity, I immediately leapt at a chance. And the reason I think why that excited me was I had been so inspired by Sandman as a kid. I had so loved that. And I think early on I realized I could do with keys the same thing that Neil had done with dreams, that every key could be its own story. And that I could tell using keys and locks as metaphors, I could tell any story I wanted. So I was never really afraid of running out of stories. What I was afraid of was having too many and not being able to keep it compact, because I really wanted to tell something that was clean, compact, and all of one movement instead of something that sprawled.
Thanks.
Now we're approaching the speed round,
Oh, no.
which is where I'll still answer questions, but faster.
I have a really long question.
Okay.
Before I ask my question, I actually wanted to thank you. The last time I saw you, you were on your book tour for Horns, and you came to Mississippi, which not all authors come to Mississippi, so thank you very much. My question is about Horns. I actually just finished teaching Horns in an undergraduate literature class.
You're too kind. Thank you.
And a few of my students actually are here as well. And I think
I hope they're getting a course credit. I hope they get
They get a lot of love from me for coming to this. I taught it in tandem with Paradise Lost, because I'm a 17th century scholar. And I found it really interesting. We were talking about genre and sort of literature with a capital L in the class before we actually started your novel. And I think over the course of the novel, which they loved reading, they almost felt guilty about reading such a novel in a literature class. I was wondering if you could talk briefly about, what you feel, the sort of modern state of literary courses and what we consider sort of literature with a capital L, and what position horror and suspense and mystery might have in that sort of category, where, horror might be sort of seen as a lesser genre or something, but actually a lot can be gleaned from it. What do you sort of think about that?
Well, I think this is a really great time in literature for people who like genre. I think that we're at this particular moment. There is a kind of movement underway where literary writers suddenly have the freedom to write ghost stories again. They used to in the 19th century. No one was surprised when Charles Dickens turned out a ghost story. H.G. Wells, was writing stuff that people cared about, even if it did have UFOs in it. But later, I think there was this kind of feeling post-Hemingway and Fitzgerald that serious writers needed to tackle serious subjects, so that there was something dishonest or cheap or manipulative about genre elements. But in the last 15 years, we've seen a lot of writers say, "Nah, that's not true. Hemingway was great, but realism is not the only mode." So I think of writers like Michael Chabon and Jonathan Lethem, who have explored genre elements, mystery, science fiction, fantasy, horror, with great relish. I haven't read Franzen, but didn't Jonathan Franzen have a talking turd in one of his books? Or am I imagining that? Did anyone read
Sure.
Yeah? No? I'm probably totally wrong about that. But that sounds sounds closely related to talking animal stories, kind of. Anyway, but we've also seen genre writers like Neil Gaiman, the short story writer Kelly Link, Karen Russell, telling stories about vampires and ghosts and the thing under the bed, but doing it with great literary skill, and winning awards like the Newbery Award and the O. Henry Award, and getting recognition for the literary merits of work that has genre underpinnings. So for a guy like me, I count myself very fortunate to be writing in a moment where I can do something like Nosferatu, and feel like it's not a third-rate form of fiction. If it's done with care and attention, and if I don't think there's a different set of rules for genre fiction than there is for literary fiction. I think you still need to have characters that have interesting inner emotional lives. You still have to explore a question in an interesting way, the questions that are bigger than the plot. And this is a good moment. This is a moment when a genre writer can do those things and be read by people be read outside of just the people who are devotees of that genre. So,
thank you.
Sure.
Hi. You have a really nice way of phrasing things. I have two questions. First, what do you do when you have writer's block, when the ideas aren't coming? Because you said you write every day, and I attempt to do that, but it's really frustrating when what I write is I don't know what to write. And second question, is it difficult, like if you have a project like Lock and Key and you're writing a novel at the same time, is it difficult to focus on one or the other, or do you just have set, this is my Lock and Key time, this is my Nosferatu time?
As far as writer's block goes, I've found skinning animals while they're still alive will almost always clear the mind.
And how many ways are there to skin a cat?
No. I haven't had writer's block in a long time, but I have had it. I have experienced it, and I think the reason I haven't had it in something like 20 years is because I've kind of figured out the seed that makes writer's block grow. And here it is, okay? It's you're telling yourself there's something you have to be writing and not writing what you really want to write, or what you have to write. You may be giving yourself dozens of reasons. You may say, well, I can't write about this thing because what will my friends say? What will my mom say? What will my grandmother think of me if she ever reads this? I don't want to write that because I don't like the way it will make me look. I don't want people to know I think about these things. I don't, and if your subconscious will come up with the material, with the subjects that it wants you to tackle. If you refuse, it will take its baseball and go home. So I don't try to. One of the things and in fact, I went through very early after I started the pen name after I got out of college. Initially I started writing stories that were about divorced couples in the suburbs, dealing with their difficult children, and I get bored just thinking about these stories. But I felt like that was what I was supposed to write because that was what they published in the New Yorker, and then at a certain point I realized, I don't got to write this crap if I don't want to. And if you want to write supernatural stuff, Joe Hill might as well be Joe Schmo. Go ahead. So then I started, and then almost every day when I sat down, I had a big smile on my face, and I started writing stuff that I was genuinely excited about. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I have gone through stages in my life when I had to juggle 2 or even 3 projects at once, but it's a terrible way to be. And I highly recommend as soon as possible moving to just one project at a time. Write that project and if you're doing a long project like a novel and you sometimes have to interrupt it with short projects because you write a comic book or reviews or short stories or whatever, then at least work on the novel in discrete chunks like part 1. Part 1 is done. Great. Now I can do that book review I promised I was going to turn in. So I think one project at a time is enough. Go ahead.
Hi. The microphone's kind of intimidating, and actually she asked both the questions that I wanted to ask. So a next one is.
I hope you're not going to ask me the capital of Peru.
Maybe I will.
It's
no.
Lima,
Do you
right?
have any
Isn't it Lima?
tips?
Okay.
Do you have any tips for writing at home and not being distracted?
Louis L'Amour wrote 100 novels, and he wrote his last couple with the grandchildren chewing his boots under the desk while he wrote. I do think, the thing to do is just decide you're going to write, and it doesn't matter whether you're on the train or I think it pays not to decide I can only write in this room at this time of day with you just kind of have to. The most concrete thing I can say is when you sit down to write, try to write the shortest possible sentence you can. 2 words is great, a sentence that's just flies hummed. It sounds like a joke, but I'm completely serious. Start your day with flies hummed. It's simple and discreet, and suddenly, it's like all you need to ride a bike is a little bit of momentum. And as soon as you've got momentum, you have your balance. And that's all you need when you're writing is just write a 3 or 4 word sentence, something nice, simple, concrete, and all the distractions melt away, and suddenly you're on your bike and you're moving.
Thank you.
Sure.
Well, hi, thanks for coming. I think
Thanks so much.
the 3 people before me got my writing questions out of the way. So I guess I should have gotten up to microphone first. But anyway, so the question that's been on my mind this week, I've been thinking of you. Have you seen Iron Man 3 yet?
I did see Iron Man 3.
Good.
I thought it was incredible. I mean, I just thought it was a wonderfully written and incredibly inventive action set pieces. And I love that character, and I thought it was beautifully acted, and it was just totally, mind-blowing. And at the same time, I wonder if maybe I haven't finally hit the saturation point on superheroes. Just a little bit. I loved it, though. I mean, the other possibility is I am on tour, and I was home for just a day or two, and that was when I had a chance to see it, and I was like a zombie all day. I was just from all the travel and everything like that, and like at 3 in the afternoon, I was just like, and it's possible I was just really overtired, and so that kind of made me feel like, wow, this is noisy and long. But that makes it sound like I hated it, and I loved it. I thought it was wonderful, but I did kind of walk out feeling like, I wonder if post-Avengers, if there's just nowhere left to go. If we haven't just completely played out the string.
I'm just happy like all these things from my childhood are coming out. That I can go see like all these big things which I read about when I was a kid.
Oh, I know. I mean, I feel the same way. I just love Daredevil, and to finally see the Daredevil film come to screen with that moving performance by Ben Affleck was just great.
See,
no, but most of it has been.
Wolverine was my guy.
I agree. No, actually, and Ben Affleck is amazing. I mean, he's Gone Baby Gone. He's turned into a great director. But there is all this great filmmaking from guys like Joss Whedon and Shane Black and Jon Favreau and stuff, guys who really are telling character-driven genre stories, character-driven superhero stories, and I love that,
Cool.
Hi.
Go ahead.
I was wondering, do you identify with any of your characters in Nosferatu?
I try not to. I try not to, really. No, I mean, I really try not to in any of my books. I know some people write write stories where every character is basically like their friends and stuff like that, with like slight name changes and everything like that. And and there's also a phrase. What is it? Is it? You guys will correct me if I'm wrong. Is it a Mary Sue when it's like basically the version of you that's like but awesome, and like I try to avoid like writing Mary Sues, and what I'm really interested in is writing about people who don't see the world like I do. So the first novel was about Judas Coyne, a 50-something heavy metal musician, and like I listened to the Lumineers and stuff like that. I mean, I did listen to a lot of hair rock back in the 80s and everything, but like I'm not like Judas Coyne, the guy is really different, and he's like. He turns out he's got a big soul. He's got a big heart, good guy, but he armors himself by being very mean to people. And on the surface, he seems like a real bastard, and I'm usually pretty polite and stuff. In the second book, there's like Ig Parrish, who is like so good. He wants to save the world and stuff like that, and do important things with like recyclable materials and stuff like that. And like, I actually think it would be really cool to have a car that runs on penguins, like live penguins. Like, just can you imagine like feeding a baby seal to your car and like getting 7 miles to a gallon, like 7 miles to a baby seal? I'd drive that in a heartbeat. It'd be awesome, And I am not Ig Parrish, okay? I don't want to, build something marvelous out of cardboard to save the world, and I'm really not Vic McQueen, who among other things is female and I'm male, and she can draw pictures and I can only barely doodle. So for me, the big goal with Nosferatu was I wanted to write a female protagonist because Heart-Shaped Box had a male lead and Horns had a male lead and most of my short stories had male leads. My whole career was feeling like one big sausage party, and so I thought I want to explore a female character, and I want to explore a female character with the imagination and energy and heart that Neil Gaiman has brought to his fiction and stuff, and so.
Cool.
Sure.
Thank you.
So looks like we got one more and then we're all done, and I'm going to go plop out and sign.
First thing I wanted to point out, I didn't know if you noticed this young lady that asked you a question earlier. Did you see her necklace? She's it's a Scrabble tile.
A Scrabble tile! Yay! Maggie Lay has a pair of Scrabble earrings. She has an F and a U. I don't know.
Hers is just an L.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome.
Second, I just needed to get off my ass. I got a bad back. But my question for you, I write lyrics, and you said something about you'll think of a storyline while you're out on a 1 a.m. run to get diapers or whatever. How do you retain them? Because every time I'm in a car or anytime I think of something, it's always in an inappropriate place where I don't have anything to write on or write with. I just try and remember it, but I always lose it. I lose half the stuff I write.
Well, first I'm going to tell you a story that has absolutely nothing to do with this question, but it sort of vaguely relates because it involves being out at 1 a.m. I remember just I had no idea when you had little kids how tired you are because you don't get any sleep at all I didn't sleep for 6 years, and I remember once going to a Walgreens, which is like a drugstore. I don't know if you guys have them out here, but I went to Walgreens and it was 11:30 in the evening, and I was so punch drunk I had 2 hours of sleep, and on the speakers this guy said, "We are half off on lunch meats, half off on lunch meats." And I was walking around the aisles going, lunch meats? Lunch meats? And I walked around this corner and I bumped into this woman I'm going, lunch meats? And then I'm like, oh God. And so I'm like, that's really awesome. So then I got my stuff and I hurried outside and I got in a red car and, I'm sitting out there in the red car and I'm like, oh God, I can't believe I just did that. And I'm sticking the keys in and the car's not starting. And then I remembered I didn't bring the red car. I brought the other car. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm in someone else's car. And it hits me. I got out. Nothing else happened after that. I flew out, I got in my car, I drove off, and it was all good. But I was thinking, what if it was the lunch meat lady? Can you imagine? How am I going to explain that? I'm going to be locked up for the rest of my life because I'm like, he harassed me in the store, talking about his lunch meat, and he was waiting for me in my car. I mean, this is the kind of shit that changes a person's life, But in terms of remembering stories, I do sometimes. I keep a notepad with me. I have my phone, my iDevice, and sometimes I record stuff on it, or I'll type a quick note. But I guess I have stopped worrying about holding on to ideas because ideas seem to me like they're fundamentally easier than all the rest of it. I can probably come up with one commercial idea a week, but I can only write 2 or 3 commercial stories a year. Maybe a novel and a couple of short stories or a novel and a few comics. Execution takes a really long time. Coming up with an idea doesn't take long at all. I did do one thing. I have a drawer next to my desk, and I have 10 folders in it, and those are the next 10 stories I want to write, where I have sometimes I have a couple pages written, sometimes I just have a couple notes. 2 folders are just titles, and the title is enough to sort of key back what I was thinking about. And I just did that because I wanted to have kind of a plan for what I'm doing next. So, but I would just say, just in terms of keeping your own stuff, if you've got any kind of smartphone,
I've got a smartphone in my
pocket. Just hit the record feature and just say it right there and record it.
The guy in the Boston hat there next to you and me, I've got a copy of it here. We wrote a song based on your first book.
Oh, really? Nice.
And actually, if you're not going to sue me for plagiarism, we took some of the words from your song in the end of Heart-Shaped Box, Drink to the Dead. That's the title of the song.
That's wonderful. My lawyers will be in touch. I
thought that might happen.
No. Actually, that's totally cool. I'm very flattered. Thank you. And guys, it's really awesome. I mean, it blows me away that people will, I see people buying tickets for like Iron Man 3 and stuff, but it's weird for anyone to come out and listen to a dude blab for an hour about words on a page. So, thanks for coming out to listen to me run my job, and thank you anytime you come out to go hear a writer talk here at the library or at one of the local bookstores. I think the Nosferatu is a story about objects that bend reality, that split the seams between the imaginary and the real, and in real life, I think books do that. So, I'm grateful to you for supporting them and supporting the library. So, I'm going to go out and sign.